What happens when a country music superstar and a seasoned television host clash over artistic integrity on live television? The tension in Studio 1A was so thick you could cut it with a knife as Carrie Underwood sat across from Sheinelle Jones on the Today Show couch, her perfectly polished exterior beginning to crack under an unexpected line of questioning that would ultimately lead to one of the most dramatic walkouts in daytime television history. The morning had started like any other promotional appearance. Carrie arrived at Rockefeller Plaza at 6:30 a.m., her hair and makeup team working their magic to create her signature look, flowing blonde waves and a flawless complexion. She was there to discuss her latest album, a deeply personal project exploring themes of faith, family, and the struggle to maintain authenticity in the music industry. Her publicist had briefed her on the expected questions, standard fare about tour dates, family life, and creative inspiration. Sheinelle Jones, known for her warm interviewing style and genuine curiosity about her guests, had prepared her own set of questions. But as she reviewed her notes in the makeup chair that morning, something shifted. Perhaps it was the recent controversy surrounding country music's relationship with social issues, or maybe it was her growing frustration with what she perceived as overly sanitized celebrity interviews. Whatever the reason, Sheinelle decided to dig deeper than usual. The cameras rolled at 8:15. The interview began with friendly smiles and easy conversation. Carrie beamed as Sheinelle introduced her, praising her journey from American Idol winner to country music royalty. They talked about her latest single, her upcoming tour, and her family life with husband Mike Fisher and their children. The exchange flowed naturally, until Sheinelle's tone shifted slightly as they entered the second segment. "You know, Carrie," Sheinelle began, leaning in a bit, "your new album really seems to tackle some heavy themes. There's a lot of talk about staying true to yourself in an industry that wants to change you. Can you tell us more about that?" Carrie's smile stayed fixed, but something flickered in her eyes. "Well, Sheinelle," she replied evenly, "I think every artist struggles with that balance between commercial success and artistic integrity. This album really came from a place of wanting to share my authentic voice, regardless of what might be popular or expected." "That's interesting," Sheinelle pressed, her posture sharpening, "because there's been quite a bit of discussion in country music lately about artists who say they value authenticity, yet still play it safe on controversial topics. Some critics argue that true authenticity requires taking stands that might alienate parts of your fan base." The shift in Carrie's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her shoulders tensed slightly. Her media-trained smile looked a little more forced. "I'm not sure I follow what you're getting at, Sheinelle," she said calmly. "I've always been honest about my beliefs and values in my music." "Of course you have," Sheinelle nodded, though her tone carried a trace of skepticism. "But let's talk specifics. Your song Stand Still seems to be about faith and perseverance, but some listeners have interpreted it as a commentary on current social justice movements. The line about standing firm when the world wants you to kneel has sparked quite a debate online." Carrie's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Music is subjective, Sheinelle. People will interpret lyrics through their own experiences and perspectives. I write about my faith and my personal journey. If others find meaning in that, whether it aligns with my intentions or not, that's the beauty of art." Sheinelle wasn't done. "But surely as an artist with your platform and influence, you must be aware of how your words might be received. Do you feel any responsibility to clarify your positions on issues that are important to your fans, particularly when your lyrics could be seen as taking sides?" The question hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Viewers at home could sense the shift in energy. Carrie's practiced calm seemed to waver. Her fingers, once resting gracefully in her lap, now gripped the armrest of the couch a little tighter. "I think," she said carefully, "that my responsibility is to be honest about my own experiences and beliefs. I'm not a politician. I'm a singer and songwriter. My job is to create music that comes from my heart, not to provide political commentary or satisfy everyone's expectations about what I should or shouldn't say." Sheinelle nodded slowly, but the gleam in her eyes showed she wasn't finished pushing. "I understand that perspective," she said. "But in today's climate, don't you think remaining neutral can sometimes be seen as taking a side? Your fan base is incredibly diverse, spanning different political beliefs and backgrounds. When you write lyrics that can be interpreted as commentary on sensitive issues," Sheinelle continued, "aren't you already in the political arena, whether you intended to be or not?" The tension in Studio 1A had become palpable, not just between the two women on camera but throughout the entire set. Crew members exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that the interview was steering into uncharted territory. From the wings, Carrie's publicist shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "You know what, Sheinelle?" Carrie said finally, her voice still controlled but edged with irritation. "I came here to talk about my music, my art, and my upcoming tour. I didn't come here to be interrogated about my political views or to justify every line I've ever written to satisfy someone else's interpretation of what authenticity should look like." Sheinelle's expression remained steady, her years of journalism experience keeping her composed even as the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. "I appreciate that, Carrie," she replied evenly. "And I'm not trying to put you in an uncomfortable position, but I think our viewers deserve to hear from artists about the responsibility that comes with influence. You have millions of followers who look up to you, who find meaning in your words. Don't you think they deserve clarity when your music touches on issues they care deeply about?" "Clarity?" Carrie repeated, her voice rising slightly, the first visible crack in her polished professional facade. "Sheinelle, my music has always been clear about who I am and what I believe in. I sing about faith, family, love, heartbreak, and personal growth. If people want to twist those themes into political statements, that says more about our current climate than it does about my intentions." Camera operators zoomed in, eager to capture every subtle shift in expression. Carrie's usual warmth had been replaced by something sharper, more defensive, while Sheinelle maintained her composure with a calm intensity that suggested she wasn't going to let the topic go easily. "But Carrie," Sheinelle pressed, "let's talk about your song Higher Ground. The lyrics mention building walls of faith and protecting what's sacred. Given the current political discourse around building walls and protecting borders, can you at least say you didn't anticipate how those words might be interpreted?" Carrie let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of humor. "Are you seriously suggesting that I can't write about spiritual protection and moral boundaries without it being a coded political message? That's exactly the problem, Sheinelle. Everything has to be dissected and analyzed until the original meaning is completely lost. When I write about higher ground, I'm talking about rising above negativity and finding spiritual elevation, not immigration policy." "I understand that's your intention," Sheinelle replied steadily, her tone patient but unyielding. "But impact and intention don't always align, do they? When your fans hear those words, when they share those lyrics on social media alongside political content, doesn't that create a responsibility for you to address the disconnect?" The question struck a nerve. Carrie's composure, so carefully maintained through hundreds of interviews over her career, began to fracture. Her breathing quickened, and she shifted in her seat, uncrossing and recrossing her legs, betraying her growing agitation. "You want to know about responsibility, Sheinelle?" She shot back, her voice hardening. "My responsibility is to my art, to my family, and to staying true to who I am. My responsibility is not to micromanage how every single person interprets every single word I sing. If I had to worry about every possible misinterpretation, every way my music could be twisted to fit someone's agenda, I'd never be able to write another song." Sheinelle leaned back slightly but kept her gaze locked on her guest. "That's a fair point," she said, "but you have to admit that some of your recent songs have been more pointed than your earlier work. There's definitely a shift in tone. Wouldn't you agree? Songs like Draw the Line and No Compromise seem to suggest you're taking stronger stances on certain issues." Carrie's eyes flashed. "And what if I am?" she retorted, her voice no longer polished or measured. The edge of exhaustion and defiance crept in. "What if I've reached a point in my life and career where I'm tired of walking on eggshells? What if I'm done watering down my beliefs just to make everyone comfortable? You talk about authenticity. Well, maybe authentic Carrie isn't as palatable as the version you're used to seeing." The studio fell silent. Even the usual hum of background activity seemed to vanish as every person in the room focused on the exchange unfolding before them. The air felt heavy, charged, and brittle, like a spark could set the entire moment ablaze. Carrie's publicist was now pacing nervously in the wings, clearly debating whether to intervene. Sheinelle, sensing she had touched on something deeper, decided to push further. "So," she said carefully, "you are making deliberate choices to be more confrontational in your music. You're consciously moving away from the safer, More universally appealing themes of your earlier work? Confrontational? Carrie repeated, her eyes flashing with something between anger and hurt. Is that what we're calling it now when a woman speaks her mind? When she refuses to shrink herself to fit into a neat little box that makes everyone else comfortable? I've spent 20 years in this industry being told to smile prettier, sing sweeter, and never ruffle any feathers. Maybe I'm done with that version of myself. I'm not trying to minimize your experience, Sheinelle replied quickly, though her tone carried that careful curiosity of someone who knew she had struck a nerve. But you have to acknowledge that with a great platform comes great responsibility. Your words carry weight, Carrie. They influence people, they shape opinions. When you sing about drawing lines and not compromising, people listen. They act on those messages. Carrie stood up abruptly, the sudden movement startling everyone in the studio. For a moment she stood still, her frustration visible in every tense line of her body. And there it is, she said, her voice tight with emotion. The assumption that I'm somehow responsible for how other people choose to interpret and act on my art, that I should censor myself, limit my expression, because someone somewhere might misunderstand or misuse my words. That's not what I'm saying, Sheinelle protested from her seat, perhaps realizing that standing might only escalate things further. I'm asking you to acknowledge the power of your platform and consider whether clarity might serve your fans better than ambiguity. Clarity? Carrie's voice rose, trembling with passion. You want clarity? Here's some clarity. For you, Sheinelle. I'm tired of interviews like this one where I'm expected to justify every creative choice I make. I'm tired of being treated like I owe the world an explanation for existing as a complete person, with complex thoughts and feelings. The tension in the studio reached a breaking point. Carrie remained standing, her chest rising and falling with barely contained emotion. Sheinelle, realizing she had pushed too far, tried to de-escalate. Carrie, please sit down, she said softly, her professional calm returning. I think we may have gotten off track here. Why don't we talk about your upcoming tour instead? But Carrie wasn't ready to move on. The floodgates had opened and years of frustration came pouring out. Off track? She repeated incredulously. No, Sheinelle, I think we're exactly on track. This is what these interviews have become, isn't it? Gotcha journalism disguised as friendly conversation. You invite me here under the pretense of promoting my music, and then you spend the entire time trying to trap me into making statements you can dissect and analyze. That wasn't my intention, Sheinelle insisted, though her tone hinted she wasn't completely backing down. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about art and responsibility in today's world. These are questions that matter to people, Carrie. They matter to your fans. My fans? Carrie's laugh was sharp, bitter, and cold. My fans support my music because it speaks to them authentically. They don't need you to dissect every lyric and demand explanations on their behalf. They understand that art is about feeling, about connection, about finding their meaning in my words. The cameras caught every second, every flicker of emotion. The tension was so thick it almost seemed visible on screen. Carrie's publicist had moved closer to the set, ready to step in, while producers in the control room debated frantically whether to cut to commercial. Sheinelle, her face tightening as she realized the interview was slipping from her grasp, made one last attempt to steer things back under control. I understand your frustration, Carrie, she said carefully, but I think you're mischaracterizing my questions. I'm not trying to trap you or create controversy. I'm asking you to engage with the reality that your art exists in a political and social context, whether you intended it to or not. And I'm telling you, Carrie shot back, her voice shaking now but fierce, that I refuse to be held hostage by other people's interpretations. I refuse to let fear of misunderstanding silence my artistic voice. If that makes me difficult or controversial in your eyes, then so be it. Her words hung in the air like static. For a moment it seemed as though the interview might still recover. But then Sheinelle made what would prove to be a critical misstep. But Carrie, she said, her journalistic instincts overriding her. Intuition. Don't you think that attitude is somewhat privileged? You have the luxury of creating art without considering its impact because you're insulated from the consequences. Not everyone has that privilege. The effect was immediate and devastating. Carrie's face went through a visible storm of emotions. Shock, hurt, then something steely and unyielding. She stared at Sheinelle for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. Carrie's publicist was pacing nervously in the wings, clearly debating whether to intervene. Sheinelle, sensing she had struck a nerve, pressed forward. "So, you're making deliberate choices to be more confrontational in your music," she said. "You're consciously moving away from the safer, more universally appealing themes of your earlier work." Carrie's eyes flashed with something between anger and hurt. "Confrontational?" she repeated. "Is that what we're calling it when a woman speaks her mind? When she refuses to shrink herself to fit into a neat little box that makes everyone else comfortable? I've spent 20 years in this industry being told to smile prettier, sing sweeter, and never ruffle any feathers. Maybe I'm done with that version of myself." "I'm not trying to minimize your experience," Sheinelle said carefully, though her tone betrayed that she felt she was on to something important. "But you have to acknowledge that with great platform comes great responsibility. Your words carry weight, Carrie. They influence people, they shape opinions. When you sing about drawing lines and not compromising, people listen, they act on those messages." Carrie stood up abruptly, the sudden motion rippling through the studio. For a moment she stayed seated, then rose fully, her frustration finally boiling over. "And there it is," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "The assumption that I'm somehow responsible for how other people choose to interpret and act on my art. That I should censor myself, limit my expression because someone somewhere might misunderstand or misuse my words. That's not what I'm saying," Sheinelle protested, staying seated to avoid escalating the tension further. "I'm asking you to acknowledge the power of your platform and consider whether clarity might serve your fans better than ambiguity." "Clarity?" Carrie's voice rose, her composure unraveling. "You want clarity? Here's some clarity for you, Sheinelle. I'm tired of interviews like this one where I'm expected to justify every creative choice I make. I'm tired of being treated like I owe the world an explanation for existing as a complete person with complex thoughts and feelings." The tension in the studio reached a breaking point. Carrie stood tall, her chest rising and falling with emotion. Sheinelle, realizing she might have gone too far, tried to calm things down. "Carrie, please sit down," she said gently, trying to redirect. "Maybe we've gotten off track. Why don't we talk about your upcoming tours instead?" But Carrie wasn't ready to move on. "Off track?" she echoed incredulously. "No, Sheinelle, I think we're exactly on track. This is what these interviews have become, isn't it? Gotcha journalism disguised as friendly conversation. You invite me here to promote my music, then spend the entire time trying to trap me into saying something controversial." "That wasn't my intention," Sheinelle said, still defensive. "I'm trying to have an honest conversation about art and responsibility in today's world. These are questions that matter to people. They matter to your fans." "My fans?" Carrie laughed bitterly, the warmth gone from her tone. "My fans support my music because it speaks to them authentically. They don't need you to dissect every lyric and demand explanations on their behalf. They understand that art is about feeling, about connection, about finding your own meaning in someone else's words." In the control room, producers were panicking, debating whether to cut to commercial as the cameras kept rolling. Sheinelle, desperate to regain control, tried one last time. "I understand your frustration, Carrie, but I think you're mischaracterizing my questions. I'm not trying to trap you or create controversy. I'm asking you to engage with the reality that your art exists in a political and social context, whether you intended it to or not." "And I'm telling you," Carrie shot back, her voice trembling with conviction, "that I refuse to be held hostage by other people's interpretations. I refuse to let fear of misunderstanding silence my artistic voice. If that makes me difficult or controversial in your eyes, then so be it." The air was thick with tension, but Sheinelle made a fatal mistake. "But Carrie," she said, pushing forward, "don't you think that attitude is somewhat privileged? You have the luxury of creating art without considering its impact, because you're insulated from the consequences. Not everyone has that privilege." The effect was instant. Carrie's expression shifted from surprise to hurt, then hardened. "Privileged?" she repeated, the word heavy with years of frustration. "You think my position is privileged? You think I'm insulated from consequences, Sheinelle? I've been scrutinized, criticized, and judged for every single thing I've said or done for the past 20 years. Every outfit, every song, every public appearance has been dissected by people who think they know me better than I know myself. Chill opened her mouth to respond, but Carrie pressed on. I've had my faith questioned, my parenting criticized, my marriage analyzed, and my music dismissed. I've been called too country for pop, too pop for country, too political. Not political enough. And through it all I've tried to maintain grace, to be who everyone expected me to be. But apparently, that's still not enough for you. The studio was silent now except for Carrie's voice, strong and unwavering. You want to talk about privilege? The privilege is thinking you can sit here and demand that I justify my artistic choices to fit your version of social responsibility. The privilege is assuming your interpretation of my music is more valid than mine. She moved toward the edge of the set, her decision clear. I came here to share my music, to connect with fans, to talk about the creative process that brings me joy. Instead, I've been lectured about my responsibilities and accused of being privileged and insulated. Carrie, wait, Chael called, finally standing, her professionalism cracking. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to attack you or your character. No, Chael, Carrie said, turning back, her voice calm but final. I don't think there's been a misunderstanding at all. I think this went exactly as you planned. You wanted a reaction, a moment. Well, congratulations, and you got it. She gestured toward the cameras still rolling. But you also lost something today. The chance to have a real conversation about art, creativity, and the joy of making music. She began unhooking her microphone, her hands steady despite the emotion in her eyes. I won't sit here and be lectured about privilege by someone who thinks they can reduce 20 years of my life to talking points for a morning show. Please don't leave, Chael pleaded, her concern finally visible. We can start over, talk about your music, your tour. No, we can't start over, Carrie interrupted. This is exactly who you are as an interviewer, and this is exactly who I am as an artist. The difference is I don't have to sit here and pretend otherwise. With that, she walked off the set, leaving Chael alone on camera, speechless for perhaps the first time in her career. The cameras continued rolling as Carrie disappeared into the wings, her heels echoing against the studio floor. And just like that, what began as a routine promotional interview had become one of the most dramatic walkouts in daytime television history. A fiery clash between two powerful women with very different views on art, responsibility, and authenticity.